on, guys? We are back here in beautiful Austin, Texas, and about to go play some poker at the lodge. Before I do that, I want to do some quick housekeeping stuff. We hit our bankroll challenge goal while we were in Vegas. I'll put the totals up on the screen here in a second. So that was kind of exciting. And did want to address something that came up in the last video. Apparently the win does not allow you to run it twice at 1-3, so that was something I didn't know. Me and the player that ran the hand, we just kind of asked what was, we asked each other if that's what we wanted. We said yes, and the dealer just kind of ran with it. So for those of you let me know. That is definitely not something the win does. They only apparently only do that at 5, 10 and above. So if you're at the win and you want to run it twice, you better be playing mid stakes or high stakes. Otherwise, that is a no-no. So with that cleared up, I'm about to head inside and play a bounty tournament. That'll be my first time playing one of those, so that'll be kind of new. So do have a request for you guys. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do kind of with my next challenge now that I've hit my bankroll challenge. So if you guys have any suggestions on what you think would be a good challenge or set of videos that you guys want to see, leave a comment down below and let me know. And with that, let's get into some poker.
All right, guys, let's jump right into it. So we are starting with this first hand, and we are on the button, and we look down at pocket kings. There's only 5 players, as we're still pretty early on in the tournament. The blinds are 100, 200, 200. The cutoff goes ahead and limps, and I raise it up to $800. The small blind and the cutoff both call, and we head off to a flop, which comes 7-8-4 with 2 hearts. Action checks over to me, and I go ahead and I bet 1,000. And both opponents call. So we head off to a turn, which comes the 9 of clubs. Action checks to me once again, and I go ahead and I bet 1,000 again, and both of my opponents call. So heading to the river, I'm thinking they're probably both on some kind of a draw, or maybe somebody's got a pair on a pretty uninteresting board. So in the river comes the 4 of diamonds. Action once again checks to me. I don't really know these players, so I just go ahead and I decide to check it back, flip over my pocket kings. They both fold, and we take down this pot. Moving on to the next hand, we're still at the 100, 200, 200 blind level, and we're sitting in the cutoff, and we look down at ace-king offsuit. Action folds around to me, and I once again raise it up to 800. The button calls, and we head off to a flop, which comes king, king, 5 with 2 clubs. I go ahead and check. The button checks as well, and we head off to a turn, which comes the 5 of diamonds. All right, well, the board is pretty much locked up at this point, so I go ahead and I lead out for $1,000, and the button goes ahead and calls. So we head off to a river, which comes the 2 of clubs. At this point, I am finally settling into the concept of this whole mystery bounty thing. So I go ahead and I decide to jam all in, making it seem like maybe I'm trying to bluff at this pot. And the button goes into the tank for a while, trying to figure out maybe if that's exactly what I'm doing. But ultimately, they land on a fold, and we end up taking down this pot. Moving on to this next one, we're sitting on the button with queen jack off, and the blinds have gone up. The blinds are now 200, 400, 400. The low jack and the high jack limp. I go ahead and I limp. The small blind completes, and it gets over to the big blind, who decides to raise it up to 1,700. The low jack folds, the high jack calls. I think about it for a minute, and I figure since I'm in position on the button, I can probably take a flop multi-way, see if we get lucky on something, but this probably isn't a call in tournaments. I don't know. Queen jack offsuit is one of those hands that I personally really don't like, but I'm trying to stay a little bit more engaged in the game and not be as nitty. So I go ahead and I call the 1,700 as well, and the small blind folds. So we head off to a flop, which comes queen of spades, 4 of clubs, 6 of clubs. The big blind continues to bet for 2K. The hijack goes ahead and folds, and I go into the tank a little bit. I've got top pair, but there are definitely better top pair out there that the big blind could be doing this with. But as I said, I'm trying to be less nitty these days and try to give a little bit more action. So I go ahead and I call the 2K. And we head off to a turn, which comes the Jack of Diamonds. The big blind now bets 2.5K. And again, I'm not entirely sure what I really should be doing here. I know that as a tournament that has bounties, that the bounties are supposed to be taken into consideration when making actions, but I have absolutely no idea how to value them properly. So after a while, I think, okay, well, if he has a hand like ace queen or king queen, I could probably get that to call an all in, especially because the front door flush draw didn't come in on the turn. So I go ahead and I jam, and the big blind goes into the tank, but ultimately lands on a fold, and we just take down another pot. Moving on to this next hand, we're sitting in the small blind with ace-jack offsuit. The blinds are still 200, 400, 400, and the low jack, the high jack, and the button all limp to me. I go ahead and I complete in the small blind, and the big blind checks. And we head off to a flop, which comes king of spades, 6 of clubs, 7 of diamonds. Action checks around, and we head off to a turn, which comes the jack of hearts. Action now checks over to the hijack, who bets 1,200. The button folds. I go ahead and I call the 1,200 with second pair best kicker. And the big blind and the low jack both fold. So we head off to a river, which comes the 3 of hearts. Hijack now checks. I go ahead and I check as well. He flips over the 3 of diamonds to show he hit a pair on the river. I flip over my ace jack, and we end up taking down this pot. All right, guys, moving on to this next one. And the blinds have gone up again. The blinds are now 300, 600, 600. We are in the big blind, and we look down at jack 5 offsuit. The cutoff, the hijack, and the small blind all limp. So I go ahead and I check my option, and we head off to an interesting flop. It comes jack 10, 5, 2 clubs, and a spade. I go ahead and I decide to lead out for 1,500, and the hijack calls. So we head off to a turn heads up. There comes the 3 of hearts. I go ahead and I check, and the hijack checks behind. And we head off to a river, which comes the queen of diamonds. I go ahead and I check one more time, and the hijack bets 2K. And this is where I think I might have made a little bit of a mistake. I feel like I've got a pretty sneaky 2-pair here, and I should probably be able to extract value. But I've also noticed that as we've been sitting here, the hijack is a little bit of a nit and doesn't really respond to 3-bet. He's folded to a lot of 3-bets and a lot of check raises. So I'm also not entirely sure I'm going to get much value out of him, and I don't think that river card is going to be a way for me to do it. So I go ahead and I just call. He flips over king jack, and I flip over my jack 5 and take down this pot. Moving on to this next one, we are sitting in the cutoff, and the blinds are still 300, 600, 600, and we look down at king 7 of diamonds. Middle position is raised it up to 1,300, and I go ahead and I call. The button calls, and the big blind calls, and we head off to a flop, which comes king 9, 6 rainbow. So action checks to me, I check, and the button bets 2,500. Action folds back to me, and I tank for a little bit because I've got top pair, but I've only got a really weak kicker, and there are better options out there, and the person on the button literally just sat down at the table. This is like their second hand, I think. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. So I go ahead and I just call the 2,500, and we head off to a turn, which comes the 6 of spades. I go ahead and I check once again, and now the button sizes up and goes ahead and bets 6K. I go into the tank here a little bit because she's doing this off of a starting stack, which is only 25,000 chips. So I'm not entirely sure what bluffs she's going to be doing this with. So after a while, I decide to go ahead and just lay my king down, figuring my kicker probably isn't very good. The button flashes me the king jack suited before mucking her cards, and we move on to the next hand. All right, guys, moving on to this next one. We are sitting in the big blind, and we look down at pocket kings once again. The blinds have gone up to 400, 800, 800. There's a limp under the gun and a limp from the low jack. Action folds back around to the small blind, who also goes ahead and limps in, and I can't really let all that limping get around. So I go ahead and I raise it up to 3,100. The The under the gun player calls, and everyone else folds, so we head off to a flop, which comes 10-7-5 rainbow. It's a pretty decent flop for me as far as my actual hand, so I go ahead and I lead out for $5,000, and the under the gun player quickly folds, and we just go ahead and take down that pot. All right, guys, we are still sitting at 400, 800, 800 blinds when this next hand comes around. We're sitting on the button, and we look down at Queen of Spades, Queen of Hearts. Action folds to me, and I go ahead and I raise it up to 3,100 once again, and both the small blind and the big blind call. So we head off to a flop, which comes King of Hearts, Jack of Spades, 5 of Hearts. The blinds check, and I go ahead and I check as well, and we head off to a turn, which comes the 3 of Hearts. Action once again checks around, and we head off to a river, which comes the Ace of Hearts. The small blind checks, and now the big blind leads for 3,500. I double check and make sure that I do have what I think I have, which is the nut flush on this board. And I start to think about how maybe there's a way I could get the jack high flush to call me. So I sit in the tank for a little bit and then decide to go ahead and jam all in. The small blind folds, and I'm now just praying for the big blind to find a call with something like the Jack of Hearts or the 10 of Hearts or maybe even the 9 of Hearts if that's what he was betting. But ultimately, the big blind decides to go ahead and fold, and we take down this pot. So far, I haven't exactly done a great job of collecting bounties. I've won some decent-sized medium pots. I've won some okay large pots. There have been a handful of moments where I've crippled an opponent and only to have someone else at the table stack them off and collect the bounty. So I am getting a little annoyed at this point where it seems like I'm playing okay poker and getting okay hands. I'm just not getting the bounties, which is a little frustrating. So in this hand, the blinds have gone up to 1K, 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 and we're sitting in the big blind with 10-6 of suited spades. Low jack, the cutoff, the button, and the small blind all limp in, and I go ahead and I check my action, and we head off to a flop, which comes 10-4-5 rainbow. The cutoff bets 3K off of a very short stack. He's only got like 15K total, so he's got like 12K behind at this point. The button and the small blind fold, and I'm sitting now around 45 to 50K. So I go ahead and I jam all in, thinking this would be a good opportunity to maybe pick up my first bounty. The cutoff thinks about it, gives a bit of a sigh, and then calls and flips over Queen 10 offsuit. So we both have top pair, but he's definitely got me out kicked. So we head off to a turn, which does not help me. It comes the Jack of Diamonds, and then we head off to a river, which also doesn't help me. It comes the 8 of Clubs. So we end up losing that pot, and doesn't feel super good, but hey, you know, we tried to get a bounty, and we got to move on to the next one. All right, moving on to this next hand. We're now sitting in the small blind. The blinds are still 1K, 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 and we look down at pocket 10s. Action folds to me, and the big blind, who's immediately to my left, has been crippled pretty short up until this point. He's only got like, I think he only has around 7,500 left. So I go ahead and I jam all in, and the big blind goes ahead and calls. And he flips over ace-6 offsuit. I flip over my pocket 10s, and we head off to a run-out, which comes Jack-7 ace rainbow on the flop. So I'm going to definitely need some help here. Turn comes another jack, and the river comes a 4. So we end up losing that all in and miss out on that bounty. All right, guys, moving on to this next hand. We've lost a couple of hands here and there, and the blinds have gotten pretty big. So the blinds are now sitting at 1K, 2K, 2K, and we are down to about 21,000 in chips. So we've only got about 10 big blinds. And we're sitting on the button, and we look down at ace-queen offsuit. The low jack is raised to 3K, and the high jack has called. So I go ahead and I take this opportunity to jam all in for my 21,000. And it gets back to the low jack, who rejams for 106,000. The high jack, announces F it, which is something I never really like to hear, especially in a tournament, and he calls off of his 36,000K stack. So we've got a three-way all-in. Once the dealer counts out the chips and makes the pots correct, we all flip over our cards. The low jack flips over king jack offsuit, and the hijack shows ace king offsuit. All right, so we're definitely going to need some help here as I flip over my ace queen. Then we head off to a flop, which comes ace 3 queen rainbow. Okay, well, that's definitely the kind of help we were 100% looking for. So we head off to a turn, which comes the 9 of diamonds. There's no flush draws. There's no flush draws, and the low jack only has a straight draw, so all we really got to do is fade a king or a 10, and we're about to triple up. And we head off to a river, which comes the king of hearts, because of course it does. Once the dealer checks everything to make sure that the hands are read properly, the hijack scoops the main pot, which is us, and I go ahead and I toss in my bounty chip. I tap the table and wish everybody good luck as we head for the doors and head towards an outro. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave me a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.